Hello and welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. My name is Brian Perez, and it is Thursday. You know what that means. We are here until 5 p.m. Pacific time, and boy, would we love to hear from you. And girl, we'd love to hear from you as well. So give us a call at 888-564-6173, 888-564-6173. Yes, I kind of literally mean boys and girls, like kids, you can call us, but we also mean men and women, you can call as well. 888-564-6173, and we're here till 5. So call us. And answering your questions today, we've got Richard Cimino and Bobby Conway. Bobby is the pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's visiting us in town this week. Always a pleasure to see Bobby in the studio. And Richard Cimino is here as well. He's sitting in for Brian Broderson. Welcome, gentlemen. What's up?
Good to be with you guys.
Great to be here.
Are you teaching again this Sunday at Calvary Costa Mesa?
Char is teaching.
Char's teaching this Sunday. Okay, very good. But we've enjoyed your teaching the past few weeks.
Well, thank you.
That's been really cool. Yeah. Bobby, and you're flying back in time to teach this Sunday. You were mentioning on yesterday's program again, which you were kind of going to be teaching on, and that'll be available next week on the imagechurch.live website. So we'll check that out later. All right, 888-564-6173 is the number. You can also send us your questions on Facebook Messenger or on Instagram or by using the form on our flagship radio station's website, kwave.com. There's a contact page, but that's not what I'm talking about. There's an actual pastor's perspective page, so go there, fill out that form. It'll get to us quicker. But again, the best way to get an answer to your question is to call us at 888-564-6173, and today we are here until 5 p.m. Pacific time. So here's one of those questions that was sent in using the online form at kwave.com. Dear pastors, when I was a younger man struggling with my faith, God used apologetics to answer my doubts, and I ultimately rededicated my life to Jesus Christ. I loved apologetics because it demonstrated that Christianity is indeed a thinking man's faith. I love that. But recently, I've become disillusioned with it because nowadays it seems the aim of many apologists is to own the critics, close the deal, and add a notch to their Bible belts. I used to be just like that, but now I realize coming to faith in Jesus is as much a decision of the heart as it is of the mind. Knowledge puffs up, and it's made many apologists arrogant and rude. It's all about the head knowledge and nothing about the heart or will. How can I regain a proper balance or middle ground on apologetics since it saved me when I was younger? Bobby, we'll start with you since you are an apologist and not an arrogant one, I might add.
I hope not, because I, too, understand his concern, and it's something for us to be mindful of. I would say, though, as a person who knows a lot of apologists, I don't think that that is the tone of those who are trained apologists. I do think that you get people that might think that they're apologists, or they go online and they've read a couple apologetic books and they're really dangerous, and that becomes problematic. But by and large, I mean, the apologists that I know are very humble people. They, care about truth. They care about loving others. They want to come off the right way. But when you think about 1 Peter 3:15, always be ready to give an apologia, a defense, an apologetic to those who ask for the hope that is in you. But then Peter closes off with, but do this with gentleness and respect. So we need to respect the individual. We need to be tender toward people when we're talking with them. So I would say that concerning apologetics, apologetics in and of itself is a good thing. Bad apologetics, isn't representative of good apologetics. And people have to be careful that they don't use their sword that's been sharpened through study to go and slice people up.
Yep.
That should never be the motivation in apologetics, and I would concur. What should apologetics tackle? Well, I think one of the trappings of it is sometimes people go and they get passionate about topics that aren't that important. So we're irrelevant in a sense, as apologists. And I think it's really important then, if we're going to step back and say, what can this look like? First off, I would say that when we are learning apologetics, we want to learn how to defend the faith in the context where we live. So sometimes people are studying Confucianism, let's say, and you're not even in a context where that's going to be appropriate. If you live in Salt Lake City, you want to have an apologetic on Mormonism. If you live in Hollywood, you want an apologetic on Scientology. So if you live in Hawaii, you want an apologetic on Buddhism. So all this stuff, it's supposed to be practical and relevant. And the way that apologetics emerged in the early church, it was in response to people, testing the truth or bringing error into the church. And therefore, it's a defense to put that in proper perspective as it relates to truth. So I wouldn't be discouraged at all about doing apologetics. I mean, the option wouldn't be to not do it.
Yeah.
That would be silly. It'd be like, man, I'm really bothered by the way some of these theologians just end up so liberal. Well, that doesn't mean theology's bad. It just means there's such a thing as bad theology, and we need to avoid that.
Yes, and there's a spectrum in which I think we have to be, well, let me back up one moment. The point of apologetics is not to defeat the opposing view. Mm-hmm. It's to help bring truth to the person that we're talking to. And we can't twist anybody's arm into embracing truth, but we should be able to have an answer for the thing that they don't understand or for their critique of Christianity. And I think it's also really helpful to be humble enough to accept the critique and to also be able to say, I hear where you're coming from, and I understand why you're coming from there. And then I think also it's so important to realize that there is some, and maybe you can help me with this one, Bobby, is there's a reasonable framework where, the truth that you're trying to defend, it has some breadth to it, in the sense of like there are different degrees to which people will say, or ways they look at that truth. They embrace that truth and go, I believe that, but I actually think it's kind of, if we're going to do it like on a spectrum, like if right is conservative, left is liberal, there can be a maybe a not centrist agreement with it. And I think that a lot of times we're trying to defend the truth, and we think that we have to get everybody right into the midpoint as we see the midpoint, or even to the right, where we think the right is the more accurate place to lie, to land on that truth, if that's making sense to you. Like, no, the point is just to communicate the truth, and there are going to be some people who will agree, but maybe not in the exact way you believe that truth that you're defending or trying to explain. And that's where I think so many fights end up happening amongst Christians, is they're arguing people towards their particular stance, where it is on that spectrum, left to right or dead center on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, I feel like when it comes to apologetics, that the person involved in this arena, if you feel like you have to get people to see the world the exact way that you see the world, then you will never be content in this world.
Yeah.
You will always struggle. One of the marks of walking in sanctification, I think, is the ability to live and let live, to give space, to recognize that people didn't arrive at the current positions that they hold overnight. And so we shouldn't think just because they ask us a question, we give an answer, that it just demolishes everything that has shaped them up to that point. So we need to be patient. We need to take time with people. We need to love on people. And that is something that could go a long way. So C.S. Lewis talks about in Mere Christianity, the idea of inside like this large house, let's say, with hallways, and then there's different rooms, and the different rooms might represent the different denominations. The danger is don't just stay outside of a church in the hallways. You're part of the church, you're part of the house, but get inside a room. But just because you go inside a room, don't think that the purpose of being inside the room is to criticize what everyone's doing wrong in the other rooms.
Right.
Just learn how to be gracious with people.
Yeah, and we've had that question here before. I mean, not quite the way this one was, but where people call in and they say, what's the best way to get into apologism? Is that, or apologetics? Yes, not apologism. Apologetics. And one of the questions we ask is, why? Because if all you want to do is win arguments, against your friends, that's not the best reason to get into it.
That's right, yeah. So what is the purpose of apologetics? I mean, there's a number of purposes that it can serve. Number one, it can help the doubter that's struggling. It can kind of put, like as my friend Greg Kokel says, it can put a stone in their shoe, makes them uncomfortable while they're walking so that they start exploring more. It can help somebody to become stronger in their own faith in giving them a Christian worldview. It can help defend the Christian faith against the attacks that it faces. And then we should be thankful because there's some people, they might not have been born with a natural ability or aptitude to do apologetics on the level that some may do it on. But I would say we should never begrudge the fact that apologetics is done at the highest level. Like, we should never want to bring everybody down to where we are. In other words, I think of William Lane Craig, who I would say is the GOAT for apologetics of all time. I think he's the greatest Christian apologist to ever walk planet Earth, right? Some might say, oh, well, what about Apostle Paul? Well, I think Apostle Paul was a great biblical theologian, and he did apologetics. But I mean, I'm talking just a pure, trained apologist. A lot of times people listen to Craig and they don't even really know what he's talking about. But they can take comfort in the fact that he goes up against the sharpest secular minds in the world, and he shows that Christianity is defensible. And so there is even a place for that when it's done at such high levels that even if you don't understand it, you can put your head down at night and go, hey, well, thank God some people do.
Good stuff. 888-564-6173 is the number to call with your question. 888-564-6173. Let's do one more. This one was sent in online, and this is it. Hello, pastors. Should I continue to teach in Awana if I don't do any soul winning? Awana is the children's ministry, right? Yeah. So this person writes in, I watch porn from time to time, and I struggle with integrity. Should I come clean with my pastor? I feel like I should not be in this ministry. Bobby, what do you say to this person?
Well, number one, I think it's good that you're sensitive to your conscience. I would say I don't know the depth of the struggle that is taking place, but it seems like there's some character things in your life that's causing you to feel hypocritical in what you're doing. And so I would say you've got a couple options. Yeah, you can step down, or I don't know, again, how severe things have gotten, but it's possible that, I'm going to grow into this. And so maybe it's taking a break. So you can step down, you can take a break and grow, or you confess, get on a good accountability plan to get life in order and to grow and meet the Lord in your Christian sanctification.
So it almost, okay, and I'm not saying that this is what this person is saying. But it's almost like this person is thinking because they keep struggling with this particular sin, they should just give up the, teaching the Awana group. When in reality, it almost seems to me like they're more willing to, I'll just give up the Awana group, and that way if I fall into this porn again, you know what I'm trying to say? It's almost like taking the easy way out.
To kind of sin.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be problematic, of course. And then that brings up the question too, and I think, Richard, you would be able to offer a lot of this, with all your ministry experience. But somebody comes to us and they're struggling and they're kind of wondering, like, at what point in my struggle do I need to slow down, step back, maybe even resign? Because there are issues sometimes, like if somebody slips up with porn, they may feel that, and you can understand why. But then you think about somebody who never looks at porn, but they're perpetually arrogant. And when you read in 1 Timothy 3, it talks about an elder not being arrogant. But we tend to look over some of those things. Mm-hmm. And so you could see a person who's arrogant staying in ministry, telling the person who looked at porn one time, but he's totally humble, that he needs to step down. So it gets confusing at times.
Yeah, and I think that we need to. There's two things. Sin is sin. There's no like, and if you would, gradations in the sense of sin is what it is before God, but there are differing consequences to differing sins, and so so that's one factor. The second factor is that neither arrogance, blatant, consistent arrogance, nor an ongoing problem with porn, neither of them should be given a pass. They're continuous flaws in somebody's life. And sometimes we think, but look at the gifting. The gifting isn't the point. You could be the most gifted of guys.
Right.
And of course, we can think of several like really high profile people involved in pastoral ministry and Christian leadership of late, but where they tolerated clearly blatant ongoing sin in people's lives because they valued the gift so highly. Now, what we need to do is value the human higher and understand that them being well with God, the state of their soul to be in a good place is more important than whatever contribution they can make to the body of Christ, right? That's the most important thing. So to this brother who's been struggling with watching pornography or looking at pornography, it's like, no, what you're doing is not more important than who you are. And you want to. That's where pastoral care comes in. It's not just like, well, we're going to toss you out of the church because you have this ongoing problem. It's not how we want to walk with you into victory. We want to help you move away from this thing that seems to be this besetting sin in your life, and we want to see you walking in liberty in Jesus Christ. And we're here with you, and it's going to be slow, it's going to be hard, but we want to help bear that burden with you. And we, the Bible says if somebody's overtaken in a fault, right, in Paul's letter to the Galatians, you who are mature, restore such a one, right? And that word restore, it's like a word for setting a broken bone. And so it's important enough that you're close enough to, and it's an observable break. Or you're close enough to where, some physicians, you'll walk in and you got a compound fracture and there's an exposed bone, yes, you have a broken bone. No problem. You could see that from across the room. But there are some that unless you use imaging or the physician's going to go, I don't even appreciate a break in there, but let's get an image on it. And you get really up close with them. You're holding their hand in front of the imaging machine, and then suddenly you see the break. Oh, well, that's broken too. So now we know how it has to be set, and we're going to work you through this from setting it to rehabilitation until it's fully functional. That's what this is all about. And so first of all, people who want to help that broken bone, if you would, get set, you need to let them know that you got a broken bone. There needs to be that kind of transparency, and that's a part of living in community, and I think that's a lost component. Like, people love the word community these days, but they're not so big on the transparency and intimacy part where,
right,
like, oh, I'm going to be exposed. So that would be my thing. Like, number one is, like, whatever you're doing is not nearly as important as to who you are in terms of your ministry. Whatever you're doing in ministry, step away. You being just clear and victorious in this area is more important than what you do.
Yeah, that's good stuff right there. When it comes to living our life, I think in the church, we tell people a lot, we want you to get real, we want you to open up, but I'm not sure that people genuinely feel safe getting real because, for example, when you get real, when you're not a Christian and you're in the world, and if you go and say with somebody, man, I've been looking at porn lately and I'm just kind of struggling about that, you might hear the response, well, why are you struggling with that? What's the big deal? That could be kind of the retort.
Yeah.
So there's not the moral values that are there. So it might feel more gracious because there's not a standard that when you're being vulnerable that you're going to get.
Yeah.
So what you might find is that you get validated, and yet at the same token, that validation could lead you falsely to remain in the sin that you're struggling in. So what would you rather have? Would you rather be worldly, so to speak, go confess it, and then call it grace? But as I just noticed on your wrists, which I thought so cool, aletheia and charis, grace and truth, two Greek words that I just was like, that's pretty cool. I saw aletheia and then I saw charis just there. I was like, oh, yeah, grace and truth on your wrists. We need both in our living for sure if we're going to be effective. So that means we should expect when we confess in the context of a church that we're confessing to people who recognize that there's been a moral fracture, who also recognize that there's a cross to assuage our inner guilt and angst, who also won't draw back on the standard. So in the church, what do you want? Do you want people that are going to let you ruin yourself in the name of freedom, or is true freedom not the ability to do whatever you want, but the ability to do what you ought, and it's the church calling you to do what you ought?
Yep. Well, and you know, the full of Jesus was full. We beheld his glories of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. He wasn't just full of grace, and he wasn't just full of truth. He was full of grace and truth. And then you follow him through the Gospel of John, and you see that that's exactly how he was. You see him in Matthew and Mark and Luke. It's exactly how he was. So much grace that just dumbfounded the religious legalists, and truth that was so needed by the people that were broken. And I just think that's our Jesus, and we want to be like him.
So when we were talking about, being accountable and confessing and being in community and being open and transparent, but I think there's also that fear that we might tell the wrong person the struggles that we have. Might be the town gossip or something, and then they wind up telling other people in the church, in the name of Christian love, oh, we need to pray for so-and-so. Oh, why? What's wrong with so-and-so? Oh, well, he told me, she told me this, and then boom, now everybody knows you thought you were trusting this one individual, and they wound up telling more people.
Yeah, and that's really problematic. It's like the story that was told of three guys went out golfing one day, and then when they were done golfing, they were in the locker room hanging out together, and one of the guys says, man, listen, if you guys don't mind, I got a confession here. I have really been struggling. You guys know I'm a pastor, and I've just been really struggling with alcohol addiction and drunkenness, and I just feel like I need to get this load off. And the guys were like, man, thank you for sharing. That just means a lot. The other guy says, while you're at it, I've been struggling with porn, and I just, I want to come clean too in the name of this friendship. And they looked at the other guy, and anything that you have that, you want to open up with? And the guy looked, he says, well, actually, yeah, I have a struggle as well. I'm an incredible gossip, and I can't wait to get out of here.
I was going to say that.
You don't want that person.
Right.
And the other thing, as Christians, we don't owe the fabric of our interior life to everybody we come in contact with. Vulnerability is a prized possession that somebody gives to you.
Yeah.
And we should appreciate that. So if somebody is going to share a piece of their heart, then that's something that we should take and appreciate. But I remember as a young Christian, there was this guy who was the leader of a massive organization. And he would just kind of walk up to people, and he was always just checking in on their thought life. And he was just asking guys, like, hey, have you masturbated lately? Right? And he would throw that term out and ask people that, he didn't even know. And I think about that all these years later, and I'm thinking, if somebody was struggling and they didn't know you, what would make them feel like they can be safe with you? Like, if you want somebody to reveal that kind of intel, there should be some relational capital in their life with you. And so I would just say to those that are out there, just because we're a part of the church and we want to be authentic and real, that doesn't mean everybody gets access to us in that way. We can be selective about who we share with.
Yeah, and there needs to be a culture of that. That there needs to be a culture within a local church, a culture within a relationship and a friendship, a group of friends that actually, like, I love Ray Ortland's thing, gospel plus safety plus time. Right? The truth of God's word, the story of God in redeeming us, plus safety, the people feeling like they're not going to be crushed for their brokenness and revealing their brokenness, but time, and he says time because people are complex and change is hard. So then when that's your culture, then people, like you said, like, okay, now I feel like I can bring this out to the open. I feel like I'm safe here to do this. And that's not an easy culture to build. It's not an overnight culture to build. And you can't expect people are going to be reticent. They're going to be, you always wonder, as pastors, you wonder, like, why are people fringy? Why don't they just really, some people want to hide in congregations. And I think if the culture is so openly gospel plus safety plus time, it's almost like they feel like, I can't escape this. And I not only can I not escape it, it's like it's overtaken me. I want to be in the middle of that. I want my life to be, I want to walk in the light. So,
You know what we're doing this Saturday night at Image Church? I'm excited about it. We have a family that's very affluent. They have this beautiful home on Lake Norman where we live. We live in Lake Norman. It's the largest lake in the Carolinas. And so it's a suburb. It's got, very much of a boating community. And we're doing a church night and at their house, and we're going to watch the movie The Greatest Showman, because I saw that several years ago, and I thought, man, I would love to be a part of a church like that, just a bunch of misfits that can actually come together. And so we're going to watch that and talk about, what are things we can learn from The Greatest Showman? Like, what can a movie like this teach us about church, that we're misfits, that we're going to be accepting, and the danger that is always there. It's to believe the lie that to be truly accepting means to embrace the way of the misfit. When the misfit is not properly living for Christ, we have to realize that we can still show tons of love and tons of grace, but again, that standard is still there, and we're called to live according to that. And again, God puts the standard in place. I was doing my quiet time this morning in the book of Galatians, and I love verse 1 of chapter 5. For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. And we've been set free from the law in the sense of trying to perform the law to experience salvation, but we've also been set free to do righteousness. So on one side, the law, if you're going to keep that yoke, you're going to have to keep the entire thing perfectly in order to obtain righteousness. So then Christ comes along, he fulfills the law that none of us could keep to be perfect, and as the perfect one, he comes to set us free. And then in his freedom, he says, as you proceed through earth, you focus on my justifying righteousness that's been attributed to you. And so therefore, when you live, you're free to pursue becoming righteous. Yeah.
It's beautiful. Charles teaching on Jesus saying, this coming Sunday, Jesus saying, I didn't come to abolish the law, I've come to fulfill it. And it's like,
and that he did.
Dude, it's going to be great. We were talking about it at lunch today. It's going to be great. So if you're listening, I would encourage you, come out this Sunday and hear that message.
Yep. 2 services to choose from, 8:30 or 11. If you're not here in the Orange County area, you can watch live online on the Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa website, cccm.com. Again, those service times are 8:30 and 11 Pacific time. This is Pastor's Perspective. Brian Perez here with Bobby Conway and Richard Cimino. And we are coming up on our break, so I don't want to take another question until we come back from the break. Amy, we're going to start with you when we get back, so don't hang up. And grab an open line. Now's a good time. We're here till 5 p.m. Pacific time today. So give us a call at 888-564-6173, 888-564-6173. If you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, you can see the number there on the bottom of your screen. Call it, and also share this video on your favorite social media platform so we can get more people watching and engaged and calling in with their questions at 888-564-6173. Again, 888-564-6173. We're here till 5 p.m. Pacific time, and we'd love to chat with you. So call us up, 888-564-6173. Hey, welcome back to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Brian Perez is my name, and we've got Bobby Conway and Richard Cimino here to answer your questions until 5 p.m. Pacific time. So call us, won't ya? 888-564-6173 is the phone number. If you're watching us on Facebook and YouTube, we've got the number for you right there on the bottom of your screen. Always good to see you guys there involved in the chats on Facebook and YouTube. Keep it civil. Don't forget. But if you've got a question, call us. That's the best way to get an answer. You can also send it in using Facebook Messenger or Instagram or the form on our flagship radio station's website, kwave.com, on the Pastor's Perspective page. But give us a call. We love chatting with you guys, hearing the sounds of your voice. 888-564-6173. So to the phones we go. Here is Amy calling from Rancho Santa Margarita, California. Hello, Amy.
Hi, hello. How are you today?
Doing well. Great to hear from you. How can we help?
Great. You too. I was calling because not just my sister, but a couple of family members on my mom's side have been involved with shamanism, astrology, New Age, and I've tried to reach out before to intervene, and it caused a huge fight between my sister and I. We didn't talk for a year.
Oh, my.
And then I was holding back, and it just turns into an argument. And then I tried again last night, and then she blocked me. So I just continuing to pray, but I guess my question would be, I'm sure for many people have a lot of family, too, that struggle with this. The best approach, I guess, to be not to offend the person, but I guess the most loving approach to try to help them get back to the Word, get back to church, get back to the Word of God.
So these are people that were following Christ before and they're not anymore? So they do have a Christian background?
Yeah, so my sister, she was baptized, but in the Mormon church, so it was kind of confusing. Of child upbringing, I became born again Christian when I was 10, so I got out of the Mormon church. So she had, really been confused. I think most of it is just confusion, dabbling into that and dabbling into the Word. But now it's completely away from the Word, and she's completely gone away from the Word. And then my brother also, he is. I don't think he was ever baptized. I know my older sister was baptized, but she's also really into that. And my mom is just very confused. She kind of goes both ways too. So I'm like the last of the one out of the children that is like the last hope. I feel like I'm the last one to try to reach them.
Wow. So we've got shamanism and Mormonism, and your mom sounds like she's into shamanism. Both of them combined, I don't know. But Bobby, what do you say to Amy in the situation?
I would say that you want to remain relational, and that is really important. Being a Christian doesn't mean that we have the responsibility to talk other people into becoming one. We have the responsibility to share with others that, we're one and that we'd like them to be one, but we can't change the human heart. And you know that, obviously, Amy. I do think that we can really fumble in the household. And even our reasoning for fumbled, I think, is often rooted in love. It just comes off the wrong way. The very fact that you're trying to engage your family is because you care about their soul and their destiny. Why it goes south, I don't know. I guess I'd have to observe the conversation. I know when I first became a Christian, I turned my family off. I was a total zealot, and I was always preaching at everybody in the house, and and they're looking at me going, who are you to? You're the guy that's made a mess of your life, and you're out telling everybody else. Well, one night I was hanging out at a condo complex in a hot tub, and I started sharing the gospel with somebody in the hot tub, and my brother was with me. And I ended up leading this person to Christ in the hot tub. And it would have been a great story if I said, and then I baptized the person, but that didn't happen. But I can't go with it. But boy, it would have been a great story. But this is a great story. When I was done with that evening, I got in my brother's Mustang. We left, and he said to me, I just want you to know, I placed my faith in Jesus. Watching you share the gospel, it just resonated. And that was the moment. I mean, God saved my brother in a 102-degree hot tub back in the 90s as I was leading somebody else to Christ. And he said he was able to finally register what I was trying to communicate because I wasn't speaking at him. He saw me just living it out before somebody else. And so I would say, if I could go back and repackage my presentation to the family, I would have, number one, wanted to say something like, hey, I just want you to know at the beginning, that my life has been, changed. I'm excited about this. And I want to talk to you guys about this. And I realize at the end that I'm coming to you from a place of belief. And if you're not there, you're still my family. And let's just commit to not let this divide us. But I also, because the Bible talks about that God created us for a purpose and that there's hope beyond the grave, because I believe that, I feel like I would be unloving. So like Penn Jillette, the atheist comedian, he basically says that he doesn't know why all Christians aren't out doing everything they can to proselytize the lost. He said, I struggle respecting a Christian that won't share Jesus with me. If you believe I'm going to hell, then you should tell me about Jesus. So the very fact that you're doing that, Amy, is good. But if you set the table right, like, hey, I want you to know you may disagree with me. I'm going to still love you. Don't try to force them into it. Don't get mad. Don't get angry. You're just having a conversation. And the conversation should entail a lot of questions. Like, what are your struggles with Christianity? What is it that you like about, the New Age? Because in New Age, for example, all you're doing is worshiping created things. I mean, it's like we talked on the show, I think it was yesterday, about crystals and stuff like that. I'm like, why in the world would you want to, invest your life? Why would you dedicate yourself to rocks? Or why would you dedicate yourself to what some editor at a newspaper wrote in an astrology section of the paper? Like, he just woke up that morning and had some thoughts to tell you about what it means that you're Pisces. Why in the world am I going to trust that person? Well, if you knew that person, you wouldn't trust the person, but you think because it comes in the form of a newspaper that has the backing of credibility and publication that it means something. But it doesn't mean something, because sitting around telling people what the stars mean, the stars aren't informed.
No, they're not ultimate things.
They're not ultimate things. So the star just, and being bigger doesn't mean you're more informed or more sentient or more cognizant.
Yeah. Well, I had the privilege on Sunday. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Amy.
Sorry. It's just, I get scared for them too, because dabbling in these things can really open the doors of the demonic into the people's lives, and they can disguise themselves in these ways, and that's scary, very scary.
Yeah.
For them.
Well, I just want to kind of tag on to what Bobby was saying about remaining relational with this. I had the privilege on Sunday to teach on the verses that come right at the end of the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5, and where Jesus says, "You are the very salt of the earth, and you are the very light of the world." And so he's saying, look at the person whose way of being is an expression of my way of being. Your true humility salts the earth and illuminates the world. Your brokenness over your own brokenness and the brokenness of the world salts the earth and illuminates the world. Your meekness salts the earth and illuminates the world. Your profound hunger and thirst for righteousness salts the earth and illuminates the world. Your mercy, your compassion salts the earth and illuminates the world. Your purity of heart salts the earth and illuminates the world. You desiring to create shalom, for example, within your family, like the things that aren't the way they're supposed to be, like you just actually out of the love of God, laboring to help those things become the way they're supposed to be. That salts the earth and illuminates the world. And you're flourishing in your joy when you suffer for righteousness or for the sake of Jesus, salts the earth and illuminates the world. And so genuinely, like you, it's not saying be speechless, but you are actually salting their lives. You are actually lighting, illuminating their world by just following Jesus, right? So I really want to encourage you in that, because sometimes it's just going to be that in a moment they're going to go like, sometimes you're so merciful and so compassionate. It stings me. You're so merciful and so compassionate. But now I understand, like, it's because of Jesus. So I really want to encourage you. Just stay faithful to Jesus. Follow him in those family relationships.
I think you could also circle back, Amy. Again, I don't know the full context of this, but I could see something like just writing a letter and just saying, hey, I've reflected. I'm really bummed that the conversation didn't go the right way. My motivation is just wanting to be with you forever and wanting you to know the most meaningful purpose in life. And I'm sorry for when my tension gets in the way. It's just rooted in love. And if any control ever comes out where they feel that that's happening, just apologize for that and just say, let's just get a fresh start. James K.A. Smith, I'm reading a book by him right now. He's a philosopher, and he kind of talks about this idea, of in this world that we live, having a chain of keys thrown at you. And the keys, let's say they represent different worldviews. And as these keys represent different worldviews, we're just kind of left trying to open the door. So you see people trying to figure out life, right? They got this keychain and all these different keys. Is it shamanism? Is it Mormonism? Is it Christianity? And they're just trying these different keys out. And it can be challenging, I think, sometimes, right? I mean, God is not an aquarium God that sits up in the sky. I remember in my doubts, I thought, man, it'd be just so great, God, if you were an aquarium God. I could just look up and get my cues from you. And then I had the moment where I realized, well, they had the aquarium God in the wilderness, pillar by fire by night, and a cloud by day, and it didn't help them that much. So all that to say, I think that we have enough intel to go on following the Lord in this way. But your example of a preservative is great with salt. I mean, salt in that language, okay, is it a flavor enhancer? That's one usage of it, like with popcorn. But it is a preservative. In fact, when they would catch fish at Galilee, they would pack the fish in salt to transport it to Jerusalem. Yep. And they packed that fish, that flesh up against salt. And similarly, that salt would preserve the fish while it was in journey. And similarly, we too are like salt that is to pack itself up against the world during their journey with the hope of preserving it.
Yeah, if salt's not in contact with it, it's no good.
Exactly.
You can be 2 inches away from it. So for you to just, walk out the door, it's like, you want to stay in contact with their lives, because at the least you're slowing down the decaying process, if you would, by way of that illustration, and in a very powerful way, you might be a very cathartic, cleansing agent, beginning to just kind of purify out, like in a cathartic sense, some of the false views. But it's because you're just following Jesus. You're looking like him. And conversations will come. They will not. They will come, and they might not come when you want them to come. But at the end of the day, you might find that they're just going to reach out to you. Or someday when you're not even around them, the Holy Spirit's going to dredge up so many things that you said to them, and they're going to go, oh, I don't know why I didn't believe her then.
That's so good. And people will surprise you, like with their life. I remember, I started my ministry off doing nursing home. I went to a nursing home, and I had just a heart for that because when I was in high school, I had a project where he had to go visit a nursing home for service hours. And there was this guy, Nathan, that worked there, and I'd go over to this nursing home, And I really loved this elderly guy. And I go and we'd play cards and smoke cigarettes. And he had a quota of like 2 or 3 cigarettes. And here I was, I don't know, 16, 17. And he would look at me and man, he even sounded like this. He'd look at me and go, smoke. And I'd be like, all right, hey, I got you hooked up, bro. And I'd fire up a stick for him, breaking his quota. But when I got saved, I thought, where can I start ministry? And I thought, when I was in high school, I really liked going over and seeing the elderly. So I got my jukebox and I would go to the nursing home. And I asked if I could do ministry there, and they said, sure. So I would take my little jukebox and I'd walk around and love on the people and shake their hands and talk to them and play them some music, and then I'd preach. Well, then there was this lady. She was mean and nasty as a hornet. I mean, I saw her, and man, she just was a curmudgeon if there ever was one. If you looked up curmudgeon, you would see her face in Webster's. And so I was preaching one day, and she starts walking toward me, and I thought, man, this lady, I think I'm going to get roundhoused right now. So she's coming up at me, and she looks at me mean as possibly could be.
Now, is this a resident or one of the nurses?
This is a resident.
Okay.
Yeah, this is an elderly resident. I mean, we all just kind of stood in fear of her. But she even came up to me in the middle of my sermon, interrupts the message, and she says, I want to get saved. And I thought, well, boy, I mean, she even looks angry and wanting to be saved. And I didn't really know what to do. And I just stopped in the middle of it. And I looked at everyone and said, folks, she wants to get saved. And I just led her to Christ right on the spot. Mm-hmm. Well, this is the last person you would ever expect. Mm-hmm. And so just keep it up.
That's great.
Good conversation today. Amy, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. And we just heard Amy's story of, her family involved in Mormonism, and now some of them are in shamanism. There might be somebody saying, wow, at least when they were in Mormonism, they were reading the Bible. But is that a better alternative?
Yeah, that's a good point, right? I mean, you're dealing with if they're reading the Bible, the Mormons read the King James. But the problem is you're going to have the Doctrines and Covenants, the Pearl of Great Price, the Book of Mormon, and they're going to sort of provide interpretive clues for the Bible.
Yeah.
So if you just read the Bible and Mormonism, well, you got the King James Version. That's a good thing. But when you start learning how to interpret the Bible with these ancillary tools, then that becomes a bad thing.
Amy, thanks for your phone call. 888-564-6173. Where's Daniel? I was going to go to Daniel next. Looked like he hung up. But here's Michael, who's got a question about the book of Daniel. Go ahead, Michael. What do you want to know?
Yeah, so guys, I have a quick question regarding to begin with, the Exodus, right? When the Israelites left Egypt, was that like a foreshadowing of when Jesus comes back? Because I know in Numbers 24, 7 and 8, it talks about how God will raise up his king. He'll come out of Egypt. And then if you jump over to Isaiah 63, 1 through 4, Jesus at that point his garments are red from prodding the winepress of the Edomites, right, out of Basra. And then we see him, then next, we all know that Jesus will touch down on the Mount of Olives, splitting the Mount Olives in two. And it's almost like it almost resembles like the Israelite procession, right, out of Egypt. And then in Daniel chapter 12, it talks about, it's precisely 3.5 years or 1,290 days after the abomination that sets desolation. You see, it talks about, I guess that's when around the timing of Christ's return. And then it says, happy is the person that perseveres and attains, 1,335. So 45 days later, essentially. So I'm wondering, in that 45-day gap, is that when Christ is coming? He's coming out of Egypt, according to Numbers 24, going over through Edom, right? Like I said, the exact same, I guess, a route that the Israelites took in the Exodus.
What do you think, Richard?
Well, a couple of things come to my mind, Michael. The first is the Exodus is, as far as I understand, is at the top of the list of pictures of deliverance from bondage and death under the dominion of Satan. And that's the great picture of Exodus. And then concerning, Daniel's 1,290 days, being 30 days more than the second half of the tribulation. There's these 30 extra days, and then there's Daniel 12:12. There's an extra 45 days on top of that. These are the question that you're asking are pertinent if you have a premillennial view of eschatology. If you don't, they don't have a whole lot of meaning at all. So, but if you're looking at it from a premillennial view, different ideas have been put forth to explain what happens in those 30 extra days. So there's just suggestions, different ideas. Then the Daniel 12:12 piece, there's an extra 45 days on top of the extra 30 days, after which something else is going to happen. And Daniel doesn't say it explicitly what's going to happen, but he does say that those at the end of that segment, the 75 days after the end of the tribulation, that they're going to be blessed. And if you're a premillennial person, you would say, well, the blessing here is entry into the millennial kingdom. What takes place during those 45 days? Very likely, if you're a premillennial, people would say, well, it could be the judgment of the Gentile nations or the judgment of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25, 31 through 46. But there is it's all very much predicated on your particular hermeneutic and your eschatological hermeneutic. So. But that's about the best I can give to you,
Bobby.
Yeah, I mean that's a great answer. It's a tough passage. Daniel 12, Daniel 9, 24 to 27, Daniel 12 just in general, Daniel 11. I mean that's some tough terrain right there, and so it's hard to know exactly as far as the statement that was brought up, trying to grab a picture from the Exodus. I do think that it's a nice picture for leaving bondage. We have to be careful, though, that we don't over make connections. If we do make those connections, we just need to state that we're making a figurative connection, not saying that that's the interpretation. In fact, back to my quiet time this morning in Galatians 4, I thought this was cool because in verse 24 of chapter 4, Paul says, now this, he's talking about Hagar and Sarah, and he says, now this may be interpreted allegorically. These women are two covenants. So what is he doing? He's conceding that he is going to give a figurative or an allegorical interpretation. Mm-hmm. So take somebody like an Augustine. I go back and forth, but take Augustine. He was an allegorical interpreter, and he was influenced by Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan there in Italy. And, when you're reading in Augustine's Confessions, what happens is in the last part of his Confessions, he takes time and he starts talking about the Trinity, and he even spends time talking about the concept of time. And it's so fascinating to hear a mind think through the concept of time without having all the advantage of modern day time theories like theory A and theory B of time, and to see how he weeds through that. And so all that to say, Augustine did do allegorical interpretation, but he stated in his Confessions, I'm going to give an allegorical look. If you say that, that's fine. And that's what Paul's doing right here. And I thought that was such a beautiful metaphor. Like Hagar represents the law, and Sarah represents, the child of the promise, the new covenant grace. And so he sets that up. Well, I was looking, I go, well, what a great example for us when we're preaching to just take verse 24. Now, this may be interpreted allegorically. In other words, this is not the literal interpretation of Sarah and Hagar. This is an allegorical interpretation of Sarah and Hagar. So when the question came up from Michael about interpreting and bringing in the Old Testament, I would say, as long as you say what Paul said, here's an allegorical thought, that's fine, as long as you realize in the places where the Bible doesn't come over the top of that and offer the actual interpretation, then you can play around like that.
Yeah. And isn't it great that the Holy Spirit would actually inspire Paul to make that clear? Hey, I'm using this method. But, getting back to the Exodus thing, in Luke chapter 9, verse 30, Jesus is on the Mount of Transfiguration, and Moses and Elijah were there, and it says that they appeared in glory and spoke of his decease, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. And the word there is his exodus. that he would accomplish in Jerusalem. So he was going to accomplish the Exodus that was foreshadowed by the Exodus. It was a very real Exodus.
Yes.
They were literally, by the mighty hand of God, delivered from bondage and death in Egypt under the rule of Pharaoh. But now Jesus is going to accomplish the Exodus, delivering us from bondage to sin and death, from being under the power of the little g God of this world.
Michael, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. We have run out of time for this hour, but it's Thursday, so we're going to do another hour of Pastor's Perspective. And if you're on hold right now, stay on hold because we'll get to you guys and gals first. Don't hang up. We'll be with you in just a few minutes. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll be back to the phone. So stay on the line. And if you are watching us on Facebook or YouTube, you can keep watching us on a new video that will pop up in just a little bit on Facebook and YouTube. But keep those calls a-coming until 5 p.m. Pacific time. 888-564-6173. Pastor's Perspective was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.